The Silicon Mirage, Season 2, Episode 1, The 5 Pillars. A United States senator tasked with regulating the most powerful technology companies on Earth asks the CEO of Facebook how his company makes money.
Senator, we run ads.
On camera, in the chamber where the laws are written. That wasn't a fluke. And when I started looking for similar failures across different technologies, different centuries, different continents, I kept finding the same structural features. I spent nearly 4 decades helping to manufacture illusions for Hollywood and Madison Avenue. I know what it takes to make an audience believe something impossible. And when I look at speculative manias, the South Sea Company in 1720, England's railway boom of the 1840s, the dot-com bubble, and what's happening right now, I keep finding the same 5 structural features. Not identical in every detail, but rhyming consistently across 300 years. I'm going to lay those 5 features out for you, and then, please, let me know what you think in the comments. This isn't history, this is a diagnostic tool for your financial life. By the end of this video, you'll have a framework for helping to decide whether we're seeing it again. Pillar 1, the unguarded gate. Every speculative mania I've examined features some version of the same defect. The institutions that are supposed to check the excess can't perform that function. But it's not always the same failure. South Sea Company 1720, the British Parliament, didn't fail to understand the scheme. Parliament was invested in it. Members received shares without paying. The king was governor of the company. When it collapsed, the investigation found ministers had taken bribes. The gate failed because the gatekeepers were stakeholders. Railway mania 1840s. A quarter of the House of Commons held railway investments. When Gladstone urged caution, his appeals went nowhere. The gate failed because the gatekeepers were in on the game. And today, AI executives testify before senators who can't tell an iPhone from a software platform. They're not bribing anyone. They're presenting apocalyptic warnings about their own technology and, in the same testimony, requesting licensing regimes that lock out their competitors. The foxes aren't bribing the farmer. They're offering to build the henhouse themselves out of performative concern for the poor chickens. Corruption, complicity, cognitive incapacity. The costume changes, the vacancy at the gate doesn't. Pillar 2, the halo effect, first identified by psychologist Edward Thorndike in 1920 when he noticed military officers reflexively assuming tall, handsome soldiers were also the most intelligent. It's our brain's tendency to take one dominant trait and let it color everything else. Today, we do it with money. A massive 2023 Swedish study found that individuals in the top 1% of wage earners showed absolutely no cognitive advantage over those slightly below them. In fact, they scored worse. And if the link between intelligence and money breaks down for a successful corporate manager, what does that say about the tech oligarch? Beyond a certain threshold, stratospheric wealth correlates with structural leverage, initial capital access, and pure luck far more than with innate visionary genius. But the illusion persists. When a tech founder backed by trillions of dollars in corporate capital tells you he's building a godlike intelligence that will cure cancer, something in your brain says, he must know something I don't. That something is the halo effect, and it's been weaponized throughout history into a secular savior complex. And it's not just psychology, it's plumbing. Growth companies trade at high multiples. Their valuation is their currency. The moment growth slows, the multiple collapses. The financial architecture doesn't just tolerate the savior narrative, it structurally requires one. Pillar 3, the middleman's cut. In every speculative mania I've examined, there's a class of financial middlemen whose compensation is decoupled from whether the investment succeeds or fails. They profit from volume, not outcome. The mechanism changes, the structural position doesn't. In 1720, stock jobbers in Exchange Alley hawked shares in South Sea bubble companies for a commission. Companies that included, and I'm not making this up, a venture for trading in hair, and one described as an undertaking of great advantage, but nobody to know what it is. The jobbers collected their cut whether the company lasted a year or vanished the next morning. In the 1840s, railway promoters floated schemes requiring 10% deposits, retained large share allocations for themselves, and extracted premiums before the first rail was laid. George Hudson, the railway king, paid dividends to old investors from the capital of new ones. A Ponzi scheme, £750,000 embezzled, exposed only after the crash. In 2000, the same investment bank that took a company public also published research recommending its stock. Analysts maintained buy ratings on companies generating lucrative banking fees. The 2003 global settlement fined 12 major banks. And today, the venture capital 2 and 20, a 2% annual management fee on total funds committed, tens of millions in guaranteed revenue regardless of whether a single portfolio company ever turns a profit. The fund manager's primary incentive isn't to find the best companies. It's to raise the largest fund. And the fee structure doesn't just incentivize the herd, it incentivizes the manufacturing of the numbers the herd runs on. Take the AI darling Anthropic. While internal lifetime revenue figures sit in the low single-digit billions, they tell the financial press to marvel at a $19 billion annualized revenue run rate. Both numbers are legally true. How? Through the legalized illusion of software accounting. You take your single best 28-day window of server consumption, multiply it by 13, and project a fantasy year. In traditional software, that's standard practice. But in AI, where enterprise churn is high and usage is heavily subsidized by billions in venture capital, it's an illusion. They are valuing a cash-incinerating, heavy industry compute furnace as if it were a zero marginal cost software platform. Stock jobbers in Exchange Alley, railway promoters skimming deposits, investment banks collecting fees while publishing conflicted research, venture capitalists collecting management fees on capital that may never return a dollar. The costume changes, the middleman's cut doesn't. Pillar 4, the captured megaphone. The concept of a free press as a check on financial excess is a modern ideal. The historical record, not so much. In 1720, the South Sea Company planted an anonymous article in the Flying Post, a vision of infinite returns built on what one historian calls mathiness, numbers designed to confuse, not clarify. The lone dissenter, an MP named Archibald Hutchison, had to print his own pamphlets at his own expense and give them away. The information layer wasn't captured, it was for hire. In the 1840s, railway advertisements made up more than half of all newspaper ad space. George Hudson owned financial interests in 3 papers that ran flattering coverage of his projects. The railway press didn't report on the mania, it was funded by the mania. In 2000, sell-side research was, and I'm quoting a post-crash analysis, first and foremost, a market function for investment banking. And today, a Pentagon official goes on national television to warn that AI is too unreliable to trust. A tweet seen by 1 million people reframes it as Pentagon thinks AI is sentient. A criticism of the technology transformed into confirmation of its transcendence. No one makes a falsifiable claim. The atmosphere, the vibe, does the work. Paid pamphleteers in 1720, ad-funded journals in 1845, conflicted research in 2000, access journalism, and digital atmosphere today. Whatever information ecosystem exists tends to be funded by the very phenomenon it's supposed to scrutinize. Pillar 5, the architecture of Audacity. The 5th pillar is the most counterintuitive. Impossibly large claims function as their own immune system. A small lie falls within your cognitive range of experience. You can check it. A colossal lie falls outside that range entirely. And your brain, confronted with something that defies all common sense, will blame its own perception before it blames the architect. I helped to build manufactured perceptions for more than 35 years. First rule: scale is a weapon. A small exaggeration gets flagged. An epic lie gets believed because the audience assumes nobody would fabricate something that large. The South Sea Company promised limitless wealth from a geography most investors couldn't find on a map. Enron claimed to have reinvented the energy market. Sam Altman proposed a $7 trillion semiconductor network. TSMC engineers, the people who actually build these things, reportedly laughed in his face. But to investors and legislators, the number was too large to be a lie. And there's a concept in finance called the Byzantine premium. The extra money an investment attracts simply by being too complex to evaluate. If you can't understand it, and the smartest people in the room are writing checks, what does that make you? When the promise is so large that disbelieving it makes you feel small, the promise wins. An unguarded gate, whether the gatekeepers are corrupt, captured, or outmatched, a public whose psychology needs the architect to be a genius, a middleman class that collects its cut, whether the building stands or falls, an information ecosystem funded by the very phenomenon it's supposed to scrutinize, and promises so large that doubting them feels like a personal failing. I found them in 1720, I found them in the 1840s, I found them in 2000, and I'm finding them right now. Look for these pillars. The more of them you find standing together, the harder you should look at what they're holding up. That's not a prediction, it's pattern recognition. And now it's yours. I'm Julian Whatley. This is the Silicon Mirage, and now you see it.